I want to try to make my presence worthwhile to you. This is my objective in the next short amount of time. I know most of you have been working very hard now for a number of months on the locust problem in Pakistan. So throughout that period, you become certainly much more familiar with our enemy, with the desert locust. But I would like to just kind of give you some background information on the pest, of course. Some of it you may know, some of it may be new to you, and then discuss the early warning system and the control strategies that are in place to manage this pest. So with that, a short introduction. This is the scale of the problem that can be faced. And so it's not only in Sindh, it's not only in Pakistan, but it's in about 20% of the Earth's land surface. And this basically stretches from West Africa to India, and it's normally in the desert areas, as you can see in the red outline. But when there's very good ecological conditions, locusts breed very quickly, they increase in number, and they can move into adjacent areas, to the north, to the south, to the west, and to the east. Now, fortunately, the position of Pakistan, as you can see, you're on the eastern edge of the desert locust distribution area. So why do I say fortunately? Basically because it means you're only going to be invaded from mainly the west, and of course a little bit from adjacent areas of India. But this is far different than if you're a country such as Sudan, where you'd be right in the middle of that huge invasion area, and you could actually be invaded from basically all sides. So, you know, Pakistan, there is some good news there. Now, in addition, of course, we have to remember the capacities of the desert locust, and they have some very, very substantial capacities that allow them to survive in some of the harshest conditions, in some of the most remote and in hottest areas on this planet. And obviously these have evolved over years and years and years, and well, actually centuries and even longer. One of the capacities, of course, is the ability to reproduce. A desert locust lives essentially about 3 months. This is their normal lifespan. So at the end of the 3 months, they're ready to lay eggs, and they lay hundreds of eggs, but of course, 90% of them die. So what that means is that there's a 20-fold increase in terms of the number of locusts from generation to generation. So after 3 months, there's 20 times the number of locusts that you started with. After 6 months, there's not another 20 times, there's 400 times, because this rate of increase is exponential. So that means after 3 generations of breeding, or after 9 months, there's 8,000 times the number of locusts. So you can see that given good ecological conditions, locust numbers can rapidly get out of control. But, I mean, good ecological conditions, how do they come about? Well, you know the desert locust is mainly in the desert, and it doesn't rain much in the desert. So it's not just the kind of the normal seasonal rains that cause this increase, but it's unusual weather events. So what's an unusual weather event? Well, I mean, Karachi has had an unusual weather event in the last couple of days, I believe. It's, you know, heavy rains. Now, sometimes these heavy rains are attributed to the monsoon, such as those in Karachi. Sometimes they're attributed to cyclones, cyclonic events. And in the past, it's these cyclones that have led to, you know, desert locust plagues developing. Now, the current situation in 2020 did not develop this year or last year. It developed in 2018, and that was as a result of 2 cyclones that brought very heavy rains. And you see, you know, some of the effects of those rains in this photograph here. These rains occurred in the Ruba Khali, in the empty quarter of Saudi Arabia, so a place where the survey and the control teams could not reach. And so as a result, there was 3 generations of breeding. So you remember that's an 8,000-fold increase of locusts in 9 months that basically went unchecked. So this is a direct result of these 2 cyclones. And you could say, okay, well, the climate is changing. So, are we going to face more problems like this in the future because of an increasing number of cyclones, which we've seen perhaps in the last 5 or 6 years? And the answer to the question is yes, you will. So that means we have to be even more prepared and more resilient to such problems in the future that may occur more often. And it's these type of unusual rains that basically transform the desert locust that's normally a solitarious individual in the desert in low numbers, that's not a threat to agriculture or to countries or to food security or livelihoods. But when we get this combination of excellent breeding conditions over a number of successive generations of breeding, so it's not just for 3 months, but it needs to be at least for 6 or 9 months, then we get this rapid increase of locust numbers, and they start to swarm. They change their behavior and they become gregarious, part of acting as a part of a group. And then you have these great clouds of swarms in the air, or these carpets of moving hopper bands on the ground. So this is what it takes to develop such problems. Now, if that's not enough, there's one more dimension that we have to consider, and that's their ability to migrate. So desert locust, it's the world's most dangerous migratory pest. And this is very different than a sedentary pest, that farmers have to deal with every year in their cotton fields or in their vegetable or fruit crops. The desert locust can move up to about 150 kilometers in a single day. It's difficult for it to move greater distances than that, because locusts, of course, they fly only during the day, desert locust swarms. So they have to warm up in the morning, and after about 2 hours of warming up, then they're ready to fly. They fly all day long, and then at the end of the day, they come and settle, they feed, they get off the ground to roost, to stay away from their enemies, they sleep, and they recharge for the next day's activities. So essentially, this means that locusts can very easily move across countries. So they can move easily from Rajasthan in India across, Pakistan to Balochistan and into Iran. They can move from the Horn of Africa directly across the Indian Ocean to the coast of Sindh and invade Pakistan. They can move easily across the entire continent of Africa. And in the past, they've moved from West Africa across the Atlantic Ocean to the Caribbean in North America. So their migratory capacity, you cannot underestimate it. It's very, very powerful. And again, this is a survival mechanism. So when do they migrate? Well, they migrate when conditions become unfavorable where they are. So they don't get stuck and die. They simply fly away to greener pastures. And they fly with the winds. And it's these winds, of course, that are carrying them to those areas of good rainfall and good ecological conditions for breeding. So as a result of favorable, unusually favorable ecological conditions driven by cyclones, and this migratory ability and ability to rapidly reproduce, we reach a situation like what you see on the map here. So all of those red dots are desert locust swarms in the past 2 years. The blue dots are the nymphal stage, the hopper band stage. And of course, the white dots are the non-gregarious, non-threatening locusts that are normally existing. So here you can see in the past 2 years where the hot spots are. And we don't have to be an expert to figure this out, do we? You simply can see it's East Africa, it's Yemen, and it's the border areas of India and Pakistan. So we have 3 hotspot areas that we're facing substantial locust infestations and obviously tremendous efforts in terms of control operations in those areas to bring this current upsurge to an end and bring the situation back to a calm period. Now, if we just figure out, we have a very huge number on the screen here, 25 billion or 256,000 lakh. This is the theoretical increase of locusts since June 2018. So in the past 24 months, this is what has occurred. And why has this occurred? Because of continuing good weather, not only in Arabia, but also in Eastern Africa, southern Iran, on the border of India and Pakistan. Now, of course, locusts haven't reached this huge number because there's control operations, very successful ones, especially in Pakistan, in India, and in some other countries. But imagine if there is not those control operations. Imagine if those efforts are not being conducted. This is what we would be facing. More than 25 billion locusts in those areas. So that's a fairly scary and very dramatic figure. Now, if we try to put those numbers, those big numbers, into perspective, because we're hard to understand big numbers, but we can understand other things. Most all of you, of course, know Karachi, and you know the size of Karachi. So imagine that there is a swarm that's the same size of Karachi. And this is not difficult to imagine. This is kind of a normal size swarm. You know, it's not unusual for a swarm to be as big as the size of Karachi. Now, in one day, that single swarm, the size of Karachi, will eat the same amount of food as everybody living in Pakistan. And that's just one day of consumption by that swarm. So you start to understand the potential threat that these huge numbers of locusts can threaten food security and livelihoods in your country, in Pakistan. And of course, it's not limited to just Pakistan. Because of the migratory nature, it affects the entire region and other regions. So this is what we're facing. This is the challenge that we have. And this is why we're gathered around the table today, and why you've been gathering around this table every week for a number of months, to face this challenge and to try to stop it. So how do we do it? And of course, your first reaction will say, yes, we do control operations. Well, yes, indeed, we do, but that's during emergencies. But how do we avoid emergencies? And this is the strategy we want to do. We don't want to always be putting out fires. We want to avoid these fires to start from the beginning. So this requires additional efforts. It requires an early warning system. And with the desert locust, fortunately, we have the oldest early warning system of any insect pest on the earth here with us. And Pakistan has been a part of this early warning system and contributing to it since before independence. So it's very, very old. And the power of this early warning system allows us to monitor globally where those locusts are, where the hot spots are starting to develop, and then where, other countries may be threatened by invasion. And this is the necessary information in order to manage desert locusts and keep them under control and stop those fires from developing. So this is one example of the outputs, of the benefits, of the results of the early warning system, as you can see the map. This is the current global situation as of this morning for this month in all of the countries currently affected by desert locusts. And you can see the dangerous countries, those highlighted in red in the Horn of Africa and Yemen, the very serious countries, those colored in orange, which includes India and Pakistan, as well as other countries, and those countries that are threatened, such as Oman, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, South Sudan, Uganda, and then other countries in green where the situation is calm, and then countries that aren't colored at all that are not affected. So you can see the geographical distribution of the current problem, and this is constantly shifting. This is a dynamic emergency. It's not like those rains in Karachi that you had 2 days ago. The rains, they started, they stopped, you have flooded areas and you have non-flooded areas. You can see where the emergency is and where it is not. Desert locust is a rolling emergency. It continually shifts. It's been in Nagorno Parker, it'll shift to Cholistan, it's in Rajasthan, it'll move to Iran, it could come from the Horn of Africa, it could move to West Africa. Very, very dynamic. So it's an emergency that we're chasing And this means this is one of the most difficult emergencies that Pakistan, as well as all the other countries, have to face and have to manage and respond to. So again, back to our early warning system. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to do the impossible, basically. We're trying to find a very small locust infestations at the initial gregarization stage within a vast landscape, a landscape that is mainly empty, remote, difficult to access, and not very comfortable to work in. And we're trying to find locusts in that. And if we're successful, we can stop emergencies. If we fail, we'll be facing emergencies every year. Because remember, in the past, in the 1940s and 1950s, when we didn't have all these technologies and tools at our disposal, there were locust plagues that would last for 14 consecutive years. That would be 50 times larger than what you're facing now in Pakistan. So, you know, as you have more than 750 vehicles and thousands of people, imagine if you had a problem 50 times larger, what resources you would need to respond. That's impossible. We don't want to reach that situation. So that means we have to find these locusts in the desert, and we have to take advantage of technologies, standardized tools. And here I emphasize the word standardize. We have to use the same tools in all the provinces, in all of the countries, so that we can easily share data, and that data can be integrated into that global early warning system so that you can make benefit of it. So imagine, you know, that you're using tools, but some of the tools in your provinces are different than in other provinces. So this means that not all that data can be shared and integrated into a single harmonized system that NLCC or the ministry or DPP needs to access in order to manage the locust. So standardized tools are absolutely critical. Imagine if India was using a different tool, and so they wouldn't be able to share the data, and you'd have no idea what's going on in India or in Iran or in Afghanistan. And so that gives you too much uncertainty, which then causes panic and poor management. So FAO has developed standardized digital tools, what we call eLocust 3. So initially there is the tablet that's connected to a satellite antenna, and more recently we've expanded the suite of tools to include a mobile app that sends data in near real time and has a chat function as well, so the teams can chat to each other within the country, and then a GPS version as well that sends that data as well through a different satellite, again in real time. And all of this data, it goes to DPP. Now, in addition, of course, and you've heard already this morning about drones, but you know, it's not any drone that can be useful in terms of desert locust control operations or survey operations. You're operating in the desert, in 50-degree temperatures, in blowing wind, in sand that can easily get into the engines of drones and clog them up. So this means it's customized drones that are only going to be useful. And we can use drones for two purposes, one for surveying and one for control. Now, in terms of surveying, and this is the drone you see here in front of you, this drone is a custom drone. It's very rugged. Its parts can be repaired in country. You don't have to send it out of the country. And it can be operated by the survey teams, not by a specialized commercial company who's going to charge you too much money, and then, you know, they will probably not always be accountable and do what you want them to do. So in other words, this is a tool for your own ownership, for the teams that are working in the provinces by DPP. They can take this drone out to the desert with them when they're surveying, and this drone goes out about 100 kilometers in distance. And in that distance, it can map those green areas in the desert where locusts might be present. When the drone comes back to the team, it's processed all of that data online without an internet connection or cloud computing, and it hands over a map to the team on the eLocust 3 tablet or on the eLocust 3 app. And the team can use that map to go directly to those green areas and check for locusts, because that's where the locusts will be if they're present. So now the survey becomes much less of a random activity and much more of a targeted, precise activity that's proactive, checking those green areas for locusts. And in this way, of course, you can find the infestations before they gregarize, before they turn into those devastating hopper bands and swarms. So this drone is all ready to go. It's been field tested over the last 3 years. It's been developed for 4 years by FAO and using a partnership with a company. So this one's ready to go. It's only been slightly delayed because of the COVID-19 travel restrictions, because obviously it's taking longer to deliver, and the necessary teams need to come into the country to train DPP and the others. Now, in terms of using drones for control, let me be very clear here. Nobody knows how to use a drone safely and effectively to control desert locusts. And this may be very contrary to what you will hear from commercial companies or from other governments or other donors. But this is the reality. The only country in the world who is trying to use drones this summer to control desert locusts is your neighbor, India. And we are basically learning from their experiences. The Locust Warning Organization is not manning those drones. It's a commercial company that's doing that for them. So we're seeing how that goes. But we have to understand the limitations of drones for control operations. And the limitations are due to the short battery life and the limited payload, which means that drones will only be able to treat very small areas, and it'll be expensive to treat larger areas. You can do that much cheaper using your ground vehicle sprayers and your aircraft that you have. They can cover much larger distances and areas. But drones can be useful in certain situations, like when swarms land on top of trees. Then, those are difficult to treat by ground and too small to treat by air. So here a drone might be useful. But, still it's going to take a long time to cover large areas. And still, as I want to emphasize, nobody knows how to use drones safely and effectively. We have no standard operating procedures. We have no guidelines. These have to be developed. So FAO's strategy and approach is not to rush into using drones in an unsafe and ineffective manner, because, at the end of the day, you're spraying poisons, and you don't want to have negative impacts on the environment, on animals, or on humans. So we need to take this in a systematic, step-by-step approach to reach, a point where we can reliably use drones confidently to know that they can spray locust populations safely and effectively. Now, in addition to drones, we use a lot of other technologies and innovations. We rely on satellites, of course, to understand where it's rained in the desert, where the soil is moist for breeding, and where the vegetation has become green in the last week or 10 days for those locusts, for shelter and for food. We also use seasonal predictions, knowing when it's going to rain, how much is going to rain 6 months in advance. So now we're in August, so I have seasonal predictions to indicate what will the rains be like next spring in the spring breeding areas of Baluchistan and adjacent sides of Iran. So this is very useful for forecasting that I incorporate into my forecast that then you can use for your planning purposes. And this can be short-term planning for planning of the control operations now, this month and next month, but also longer-term planning for, let's say, 6 months ahead. So these satellite products are extremely important. Now, all of these forms to reach the National Geographical Information System that's used in Pakistan for managing all of the locust data, which is then used for planning those survey and control operations. And in addition to that field data, of course, the satellite remote sense products are also feeding into that system. And all of those informations are then feeding into the global system that I use in FAO headquarters, the SWARMS GIS. So now again, we come back to standardization. So not only are the tools used in the field standardized and the same tool used in all of the countries, but also the GIS. The same GIS that Pakistan used is the same one that all of the other 30 frontline countries are using. So it's the same one being used in Mauritania, for example, Morocco and Saudi Arabia and Iran. So again, this allows very effective and timely sharing of information and data, and it also makes training much easier. It means that we can have regional training courses where a number of countries are coming together to all learn the same GIS, to be updated on the latest technologies. All of this field data that goes to the national GIS in the case of Pakistan and then on up to Rome, and then ends up on what we call the Locust Hub. And this is a global platform that allows the sharing of that data. And this data is important not only for the early warning system that we've been talking about and planning of those control operations, but also for Locust research, so that we can improve our knowledge in terms of the biology, the behavior, and other aspects of desert locust. And there's a number of universities and research institutes that use this data to develop models for estimating the migration of locusts, models for estimating the development rates and times of locusts, and models for other things, as well as research on other aspects of desert locusts. So all of this very, very important field data to validate that research is available to these researchers, and they can download this. Now, if we come back again to the operations, the services that FAO provides to Pakistan. So you can see on top there the different types of data that's feeding into our system. So we have the eLocust 3, we have the satellite data I mentioned, we have historical data that goes back to the 1930s, so 100 years of data, and we have models. So all of this data then goes into outputs that Pakistan, of course, is providing to the ministry, the DPP is providing to the ministry and to the NLCC on a national basis, but on a global and regional basis, of course, these outputs are coming from my office, from Rome. And so these are situation updates, these are analysis on the breeding periods to understand how many generations of breeding there could be this summer and the timing of that breeding. This is migration maps and forecasts and predictions in advance of migration and invasion, and of course other forecasts to help you with your planning in terms of the survey and the control operations that you're undertaking. So this is a global system that requires and relies on standardized tools that are used by the locust teams in all of the countries. So what are we trying to do then with this system? Well, of course, yes, we're trying to kill locusts, aren't we? This is our main objective. But we want to do that effectively, efficiently, in a cost-effective manner, and safely. So this data helps to increase the number of control teams during emergencies, like what has occurred in Pakistan, and to position them, to prioritize those areas of control. And so a control campaign such that you're organizing and that you're implementing now in Pakistan for the second consecutive year relies on a number of different elements. You have to have advanced planning. That's absolutely key. You just can't run around and put out fires as they come. You have to do this in a systematic manner. But this requires information, which I've been talking long about now, so no need to continue on that. But the information is absolutely critical to any type of control campaign. It's similar to a war. You need to have information to where your enemy is if you're going to respond. But in addition, you need to have a very sensible and a very efficient and effective organizational structure and logistics. And we've seen now in Pakistan that this is now in place. You've been working very hard the past 6 months to put in a good system, that covers all of the districts, the main provinces that are affected and the federal level to ensure, that the locust can be addressed at all of those levels, but also that you can respond to the dynamic nature of the locust. So as they quickly will move from the Nagar Parker district and Tar Parker and Sindh across the Indus Valley to Baluchistan, you then have to quickly respond in a structural and a logistical way. So this requires very rapid decision making. So you need to have a structure, you need to have those communications in place. It's no good if you get reports of locust swarms 2 or 3 days late. Even, 6 hours late can be too late. So it's extremely important that all of the teams, again, are using these standardized tools and protocols and procedures to not only report the locusts, but then also to treat them. And of course, treatments require, a lot of resources. You need to have pesticide. You need to have those important ground teams to find the locusts, actively searching the desert for locusts, not sitting in the office waiting for a phone call that, locusts have been seen somewhere, and then you go out to check that. No, the teams need to be proactive. This is absolutely critical. If you have passive surveying, then you're going to miss 90% of your infestations, and you will be there too late to control them. Now, in addition, Pakistan's very fortunate. You have aircraft. It is the only country in the world that maintains a fleet of aircraft in Karachi only for desert locust control operations. Now, this is very, very wonderful during emergencies, and you can make use of them. But this is very challenging to maintain for years or decades when you have no need for these aircraft. So again, this is something that has to be considered. How do you do that? Of course, staff training is absolutely critical. We have to always be thinking about the new generation of locust field officers, and nobody wants to work in the field for locusts. This is kind of the end of the world, where it's considered a punishment. They prefer to work in quarantine or places where there's air-conditioned offices and good internet connections. But locust work is in the desert where you don't have any of those things. So you have to find ways to encourage. How do we, encourage new people to join DPP, to join the ministry and work in locusts? And one way to do that, of course, is by, saying, listen, look at all the cool technologies that are being used in surveying and control operations. Maybe that's one way. Huh? Another way is, to be in touch with the teams, to give them attention, give them good training. So develop their expertise, something they don't get in universities, but DPP and the ministry can give to them, as well as the provincial governments. And you need to have a core group of people that DPP has that, is maintained during calm periods, but then can be quickly increased and supplemented by secondary teams drawn from the ministry, drawn from the provincial governments, drawn from the local agricultural agencies. And you have to rapidly assemble them and put them, into use. So again, this involves training, on-the-job training. So these are the core elements of an effective and successful control campaign. There's something about 8 of these core elements that you have to consider. And I believe Pakistan is considering all of these. Okay, so I want to finish because I'm cognizant of the short time available. Obviously, you're working extremely hard now. You're in the midst of the summer campaign that's along both sides of the Indo-Pakistan border in those monsoon areas. And during this period, obviously there's going to be 2 generations of breeding. And you can see there, you're in the middle of the first generation. It's just coming to an end. So, you've been battling mainly hopper groups, hopper bands, as you've heard this morning. And what is not treated, what is not detected, they will turn into adults very shortly in the coming weeks. And those adults will form groups, and you should expect that there will be some small swarms forming mainly in Tar Parker, perhaps a little bit in Cholistan, but then it could be supplemented by some very short distance cross-border movements on the other side of the border in Rajasthan. because the situation in Pakistan is exactly the same situation in India. In fact, in India, the situation is more. There's more locusts than in Pakistan. But because we're in the middle of the monsoon period, the conditions are still favorable. You heard how green it is still in Tar Parker. So this means there's time and there's sufficient conditions for a second generation of breeding. And this is what we can expect starting next month and continuing into November. So you'll have another second generation of hopper groups and bands to manage, as well as a second generation of adult groups and swarms that will start to form in about the late October and throughout November. Now, at that time, in November, the monsoon will have ended and conditions will start to dry out in Cholistan, Nara, and Tar Parker. So what does that mean the locusts are going to do? Well, you know what they do. When it dries out, they leave. Time to search for better areas. So what direction will they move? It'll be west. And you can see on the map the directions. They will move about November west towards Uttal, towards the eastern part of Baluchistan, and then continuing further into Baluchistan. And they could even continue across the border into southeastern Iran. So now what are they going to do in that area? And you can see the area I've highlighted in yellow for you. This is a spring breeding area. So this is a situation, it's one of the rare situations that occurs in that huge locust area in which the locusts, they slow down their maturation. And they can easily do that because they take advantage of the cooler temperatures in Baluchistan during the winter. And you know very well, it's cold in Baluchistan, especially in the interior, in December, January. And then starting in February, it warms up a little bit. So at that time, in March, is about when the seasonal rains start and the temperatures warm up. So it's then when the locusts, they finish their maturation, they become mature, and they lay eggs. And so you have that single generation of breeding in the spring in Baluchistan in March to May. So much depends now on the success of two things this summer: the success of the control operations in India and Pakistan, and the success of the locust breeding. And this will determine the scale of that westward migration at the end of the summer, around November, towards the spring breeding areas of Baluchistan. So if the scale is large, then of course you will have to undertake control operations in Baluchistan before the spring breeding. But this should not be difficult because those temperatures will be low. It'll inhibit movements of locusts, and you'll have a good chance to reduce any type of adult groups or adult swarms that will be immature in Baluchistan during November, December, January, and February. So essentially you have a good 3 months to do those control operations. So that's good news. And I'm sure Pakistan can manage that. I don't have any doubts about that. But I think there will be even better news than that. I think that the movement in November to Baluchistan, it will not be very large. And why do I say that? Because of the efforts that are ongoing now in Pakistan as well as in India. And those efforts we know will continue for at least another 3 more months until November, so that you will be lessening and decreasing those locust numbers. And I expect that even the second generation of breeding that'll start next month will be smaller than the first generation that you're currently managing. And it's because of those ongoing control operations. You know, this is the result when you have more than 1,000 teams, when you have more than 5,000 people, more than 700 vehicles, several aircraft on standby. When you throw, this scale of resources into the problem, you do get results. There is no doubt about it. And India is doing the same thing. And this is a collaborative effort between the two countries. And this will bear very good results, I believe. In addition to that, the earlier threat that you had of invasion from East Africa has gone. It has subsided. You no longer have that threat. So you have good news. It means you're not going to be invaded from anywhere else. You simply have to manage the current populations, the so-called made in India, made in Pakistan populations. And I'm sure you can do that if you maintain the level of your current survey and control operations and continue to refine them and improve them and make them more efficient. You will see those good results in the sense that that migration to the spring breeding areas, to Baluchistan at the end of this year will not be very large. So that's the good news. Now, I want to finish with one last slide. And you're going to ask, what am I doing here with a pot of gold and 170 years? You know, what does this mean? Well, there's a very important and powerful meaning here. But we have to go back 15 years to the last major desert locust upsurge of 2003-2005. That lasted 2 years. And during that 2-year period, it affected 26 countries, and there was 12 million hectares treated by chemical pesticides. So in other words, 12 million liters of pesticide. So the efforts involved in bringing that situation back to normal and under control, and it was not human intervention alone. It was also the help of Mother Nature. There was a failure of seasonal rains, and there was very, very cold temperatures. So the impacts of those control operations and that bad, unfavorable weather, you know, stopped that last upsurge. But the efforts involved, the investments that were made, which was more than $500 million, $570 million US, and 2 years of work, that was equivalent to 170 years of preventive control in those 10 countries in West and Northwest Africa. So there is the lesson to be learned. And it boils down to one simple word: investment. We, and I'm saying the collective we here, this means regional, provincial governments, national governments, FAO, international partners and donors must invest in desert locust preventive control. And I think it's clear what happens when we don't do that. We are going to have to spend an awful lot of money on, we're going to have to manage tremendous amounts of food insecurity and threats to livelihoods, and enormous areas of chemical control if we fail in prevention. So this is my message. Invest in prevention, but also because we're working in a changing climate, we have to be prepared for emergencies that will come up every now and then. And so that means not starting from beginning when an emergency occurs, but to be ready to immediately respond effectively and timely and cost effectively to bring that emergency under control. So that's my brief presentation and overview to you today. I wish to thank very much the organizers of the meeting, but more so, I would like to very clearly appreciate the initiatives and the efforts that have been taken by the Ministry of National Food Security and Research, by the NLCC, by the provincial governments, by the local communities, and of course by DPP. Because it's without these efforts that you've taken, not only would Pakistan be in a much, much worse situation, but so would all of the other countries in the region, and not only in your region, but in other regions. So, you know, these efforts that are undertaken, they contribute to a much bigger global picture. So I wish to acknowledge very much and appreciate those efforts and thank the organizers for having me here today. Thank you.